Geoff and Tim into the stream. If you want to share your screen as well, I assume it's Geoff.
Yep.
Yep.
Where we're going to get a bit of a history lesson, I think, in terms of protecting workloads. Just the story. In fact, it'd be awesome as well, Geoff, if you start off with, and you, Tim, as well, just a bit of your background, because like me, I feel like we come from the operations side, the infrastructure side, and I think that plays a huge part as to what we're seeing from an adoption rate into this world. So I'll hand it over to you. I'll come back on when you're finished, and hopefully we've got some questions for you at the end. So over to you guys.
Yeah, okay. Mike, thanks. Appreciate it. I mean, I'll go first, then I'll turn it over to Geoff. So my name is Tim Myers, and I am the Chief Technology Officer for Tsunati. And I'm joined today by Geoff Burke, who's our Senior Cloud Solutions Architect. And, Mike, just to touch a little bit, to your point on background, I was an early VMware employee back in the day. Let's call it, 2003. VMware was about 700 employees. Virtualization was really kind of coming along. People were deploying it very rapidly in test dev environments and immediately jumping through to production. I really saw kind of the advent of this multi-tenant virtual machine workload infrastructure crop up, the ecosystem that VMware created. I was very fortunate to kind of be part of that. And one of the things that we want to really talk about today is what does that journey kind of look like over the years, right? For the person that's looking at the traditional legacy server, right? The physical server, then they had the responsibility of building a data protection strategy around virtual machines. And now all of a sudden, this thing called containers is here front and center, staring us in the face. And, there's this whole ecosystem that's been built around that, right? So we're gonna tell this story and hopefully, give you guys some kind of takeaways. Geoff, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself there, bud?
Sure. So my name's Geoff Burke. I'm the Senior Cloud Solutions Architect at Tsunati. I am certified in the Kubernetes field CKA, CKD, CKS, KCNA. I'm also a Veeam certified architect and Veeam certified engineer. And I'm a Veeam Vanguard, Veeam Legend, and just recently a Calico Big Cat ambassador. So that's me.
Wow. You're a pretty important guy, Geoff.
That's the titles,
Pretty important guy. Okay, so if we jump into the next slide,
sure.
Let's tell a little bit of this story, right? This all started back in the day with what we'll now consider legacy, right? Everything that's old moves into this kind of combination field of called legacy. But in the world of legacy backup physical servers, there were things that we kind of understood back then and kind of maybe snarl our nose up a little bit at today, right? The first thing that we had to do is we had to install a software agent on that physical server. That was really the only way that we could do that backup. We did backups with these big, huge honking tape libraries. And there were people that were changing tapes every night. And tape is still prevalent today, but this was really the only mechanism that was kind of tried and true back in the day. The challenge with that is that anytime that you needed to do a restore, well, the restore was slow, right? As Mike mentioned in the earlier session, we had the laws of physics. So how big was the data that was being backed up? How fast was the speed of the tape drive? Did you have multiple tapes, multiple tape drives in a library? What was it being restored to, the medium types, all of those types of things. And when you think about the idea of using that infrastructure as part of your disaster recovery scenario, well, that attributed to long RTOs. So, people would back up every night. You would always kind of, be a little timid around the restore. I can remember, and I hate to show age, but I can remember back in the day where, you would get restores that would get to 98% and you get CRC errors on the tape. It was always kind of hit or miss there, right? We looked at the only real way to do any type of recovery as being a bare metal recovery. Again, another one of those terms that came about later in life as we talked about the difference between doing maybe a virtual machine restore versus a physical machine restore. And the problem with doing a bare metal recovery is that, well, the servers were different. we had to inject drivers. There was always unknown items in, device manager, if it was Windows, or, identifying the Ethernet driver, or, all of those types of things, right? So it involved this driver injection from a floppy or CD-ROM drive. Um, at the same time, though, if you had to look on the bright side, before we coined this term, putting all of your eggs in one basket, or server consolidation, or what have you, if you did lose a server, a physical server, chances are way back then, you were only losing one application. So if we move on to the next slide, Geoff, right? So then we jump into this idea of along comes VMware and the advent of virtual machines. So VMware introduced this thing called the hypervisor, and the idea of being able to virtualize these workloads and having just a whole new breadth and depth of open possibilities in the way that you could manage this infrastructure. It also allowed for things like faster recovery. Now, that meant that the data protection solution that you were using had to have some knowledge of a hypervisor, the understanding of the components of a virtual machine. And what that really kind of, evolved to is that these people began this P2V transformation. They realized that there was a huge benefit in being able to have these infrastructure workloads deployed as virtual machines. They could be deployed, they could be moved from like a vMotion perspective, if we're talking about VMware terminology. And then the migration happened as people began that physical to virtual migration. It also caused an evolution in the data protection strategy. Now I need to be able to have physical machines that are still being backed up with those agents. I need to be hypervisor aware, because what I really didn't want to do is still have to install agents in every single one of my virtual machines, because every single one of those agents had a penalty, right? There was a performance penalty, let's call it, a percentage of performance capacity that was being used, that would then cause you to have to, do some math, right? From a consolidation perspective, and figure out, if I've got 25 virtual machines that are all running on one machine, and I've got those agents that are installed in every single one of those virtual machines, well, I'm losing my ability to do that server consolidation, because I've used such a large piece of that performance workload just from those individual agents. And so when we come to the virtual machines, well, you know what? That backup process did have to change, because now we need to be virtual machine aware. We need to understand what was a VMX file, or what was a VMDK, and what were the important components of a virtual machine that needed to be backed up, and how do I restore those? So you can see this evolution happening as we move from the idea of installing agents in the old legacy physical servers to now being more hypervisor aware from a backup protection standpoint, and being able to leverage that native hypervisor backup functionality just to kind of make things easier and simpler. So physical servers, virtual machines, and Geoff, then came containers, right?
Exactly.
So we move on to this next slide, and we now really kind of get into this containers and the container orchestration with Kubernetes. And why don't you kind of walk us through this piece?
Yeah, so that was excellent, Tim. Basically, stressing here the evolution and the change which is necessary, because I have to admit, when virtualization came about, I didn't really understand that this was changing, and I continued to use agents for a while, and I paid for that. So it's very important. Now, with containers, they've actually been around for a long time. It was in 2014 that Docker, I might want to say, brought them to the masses. It existed before then. And the thing about containers is you're going to get a lot more of them, because they're smaller, they take up less resources. So obviously the question came up is, how do we control them? And how do we deal with them? And this was already seen with hypervisors, because in effect, hypervisors are also orchestrators. If you have huge data centers, VMware, and a lot of VMs, without vCenter, it would be nightmare, or Hyper-V failover cluster manager. Same thing here, but exaggerated. And so there were a few different types at first. Docker still has Docker Swarm, for instance, but now it's pretty much accepted that Kubernetes is the orchestrator de facto. The other thing when it comes to backup was, and I had a question I asked somebody from a backup company back in 2018, are you going to support backing up containers? And the answer was, well, why back them up? They're stateless. because a lot of these containers before would be things like static web servers. So, the container would die, bring it back up, there's no change. That has also changed. Now we have a lot of persistent volumes, and persistent volumes means that there's data on disk and it has to be protected. Okay, so we've talked about the orchestrator, stateful containers and deployments. And the first thought, again, if you're in a legacy mindset, well, okay, I'll just use an agent, a Linux agent, or if my Kubernetes nodes are in like vSphere or something, I'll just use the VM backup tool I was using. But that's a similar situation to the people who continue to use agents in VMware. You're missing out on a lot of the new features, and you're not using a native backup application. When I mean native, it means it's been specifically written to use and leverage all the new functions that are available. So native backup and recovery is essential. Then, of course, the question comes, okay, native backup. Well, what, how, and where? And this is important because what are we backing up? Obviously, we're backing up the persistent storage. That goes without saying. But there's something more with Kubernetes. And if any of you have ever dealt with vCloud Director, you might understand this better. vCloud Director had a concept called VApp. And it was a bunch of VMs which were inside a VApp. And when you were backing that up, you would not just back up the VMs, you would back up the metadata around those VApps. Because when it came time to restore it exactly the way it was, you needed that metadata. So here we have a similar situation. We have our storage, our stored data, but we have also all sorts of components in Kubernetes. On top of that, we have something in most Kubernetes distributions that are big, etcd, which is the brains of the cluster. So that has to be backed up. Similar to vCenter is backed up now. VMware finally created a scheduled backup in vSphere. Same thing here. You want to back up the brains of your Kubernetes cluster. Persistent storage, we've talked about that. It's obvious. But there are these things, these components, config maps, secrets. These are things that are essential for your Kubernetes deployment. So for instance, you might have a MySQL database, and that requires a secret, so a password for the database. And you could make a mistake and delete that secret, or you could corrupt it. So you have to back up all these extra components. It's very important that you pick a backup solution that does this. So every component you want to back up in your deployment. Very important as well, and this goes against the idea of using a legacy type of backup, is you want to be able to granularly restore these items. So if I, by accident, go into a config map and I make a change and it's become corrupted, I don't want to have to restore my entire deployment. Downtime, it's a waste. I want to be able to restore just that config map. So it's important, again, that you find a backup solution which is going to leverage native Kubernetes backups. Basically, on the native idea, again, there's even a very good example is Azure. I used to back up Azure before there were Azure snapshots using an agent. So we put an agent inside the Azure VM and treat it like a physical server. Restores were slow. It wasn't efficient. Microsoft came out with Azure snapshots. We started using Azure snapshots. And Veeam, for instance, came out with an Azure appliance. Very efficient, very quick, native. So it's the same concept here. Okay. Important question here is, if you're a backup person, you've worked for many, many years like I have, how do you stay relevant? Things are constantly changing. And this is a big change. The one thing you want to do is remember, it is a steep learning curve, but don't look at Kubernetes from afar. It reminds me of those little mosaics, you see ancient Greece or ancient Rome, those big mosaics paintings. And from afar, oh my goodness, this looks so complicated. You want to go and start slow. So take it one step at a time. It gets easier all along. Also, a big advantage of Kubernetes is you can really play with these technologies. So I can load onto my laptop Minikube or OpenShift's container-ready containers, Tanzu Community Edition, and I can mimic a production environment much better than ever before with VMware Workstation or something like that, trying to mimic an entire vCenter. So that it is a learning curve, but you now can do this on your laptop. You can do it much smaller resource. You don't need them. On top of that, there are a lot of free resources out there. There are learning sites. Kasten has a learning site. Tanzu, Kubernetes Academy with VMware. So, and OpenShift has some too. So it's out there. You can just Google free cast and learning. You don't necessarily have to spend any money. So that's how you stay relevant. I would start now. Don't put it off. I am at my 2-year stage. I've gotten all the certifications. I still feel like a beginner because it's big, it's enormous, but it's a lot of fun. Okay, so at this point, I wanted to go to a short demo to display some of the differences. And Tim can help me out too with this to show we can talk about some of the legacy things, which aren't legacy anymore. Don't get me wrong, VMs are probably not going away. We still have physical servers as well. The difference is there'll be a shift over slowly but surely more to one area. So let's bring this up.
Yeah. So Geoff, while you're doing that, right? So just a couple things, and I think from the audience's perspective, there's two things that I hear, right? Number one is it's not been a 100% lift and shift methodology that's occurred here, right? In the professional services and operational arena that we live in every day. There's still physical servers that exist. Some of them can't be virtualized. There's this idea of digital transformation that's happening where people are aggressively looking at their existing installed applications, right? Let's call them legacy potentially. And they're realizing the benefits of Kubernetes orchestration. They're understanding the benefits of the transient workload and the ability to create and maintain these persistent volumes. And that's a very different opportunity than maybe what they've had previously. It sounds very similar to this idea of virtual machines, but it's a very different architecture. It's a very different consideration. And so what I think is important for everyone is to realize that the same way we talk about cloud as being a hybrid cloud, the chances are in your digital transformation journey, most of the people that we interact with are in this hybrid stage. They still have physical legacy servers that they have to maintain and back up and protect. They have a good portion of virtual machines that are in a multitude of locations, whether they're private, managed, on-premises, hyperscale, public cloud, right? Multiple locations and technologies. And then they're also now doing this true application transformation as they move from the archaic, monolithic application to now into this more cloud native application space. And I think that part of that is to realize that it's always going to be moving. It's going to be evolutionary. And so what we tend to talk about is what is the easiest way to manage and maintain and evolve your data protection strategy that can kind of move alongside of the customer journey or the application lifecycle journey that your business is moving, right? So Geoff, you've put together this demo for us. And I think if I remember correctly, you're going to be able to show us how we can kind of do that, right? We can back up these multiple types of applications that, our legacy do require agents, could be in the public cloud, could be traditional virtual machines, and then also this cool ability to be able to use a cloud native solution for Kubernetes as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the challenges, I think, if you're a backup administrator, is there's going to be a time where you're going to have a lot of these different technologies. And we're always going to have physical servers and we're always going to have VMs. It'll probably shift somewhat. So important, at least from my perspective, is to have something or choose an application which can make it easier. So you don't have to have 15 different applications. I mean, you don't want 20 antiviruses, right? Same kind of thing. So what I've got here, I don't know how well you can see this. Is it too small? But this is a Veeam installation. And what I first wanted to just show was a traditional VM backup. So here's a Windows VM. And we would attach from Veeam to the hypervisor here, being VMware, the vCenter. And I can go in there and create backup jobs. So this would talk to vCenter, communicate with it, grab the information it needs, and then create a backup. So that's your traditional VM backup. You can also use an agent, which will also go into here. I don't actually have one installed right now, but it's the same kind of idea. And restores can be done by very simply right-clicking, and it gives you, again, from this new, used to be new hypervisor point of view, all these options: instant recovery, instant restore, disk recovery, restore entire VM, guest files, Active Directory. So wonderful. So ideally going forward, we want something similar. We don't want to get less. We want to get more. So what's happened now, at least with Veeam and Kasten, is that there's some integrations taking place, and it's going to get more and more integrated as we go along. This is the Veeam server, but what I also have here is, if I can just find it, oh, I'm in the same VM, a Kasten deployment. And it is web-based, and I will show you how it's connected up to the Veeam server. So first of all, what is my Veeam that I've got, my Kubernetes that I've got here? Well, I've been playing with Tanzu Community Edition. Again, free. And I'm just starting Tanzu, by the way. I've been doing a lot of traditional Kubernetes, so I don't know it inside out. I do know that they have what they call a management clustering. You're supposed to have workload clusters, but hey, it's a lab. I'm just playing around, having fun. Same thing as you guys can do. So what do I have? I got my little Tanzu here, and I've got a bunch of namespaces. And Tanzu has its own, and I don't really understand them fully yet, Tanzu system, Tanzu package. What I've done is I've created that Nginx namespace right here. And so I have a pod running there. So I'm using alias too. That's why I'm using K and not kubectl. So I will go in there and take a look and see if it's running. Hopefully, yes, it is. Okay, so what do I have? This is a basic, small, very simple website, which I've got running, and I've exposed it to the world. And I can actually show it to you. Now, I am not a HTML programming genius. And so you will see that my website is very, very simple. So it's, hi, this is Geoff. There you go. I haven't gone too far lengths at that. But what can I do? Well, so that's running and that's live. What I can do right now, if I want to, is I can actually change that. So I will go into the pod. I'm just going to be lazy and go backwards. And then I'm going to go to the location where Nginx keeps this. And I think it's HTML. This location inside the pod is a persistent volume claim. This is persistent storage. So the pod is running, the container is running. It's got its all system in there, but there's one location which is persistent, and it's this one. So if we look in there, we will see a file called HTML index. And if we cat, we will see, hi, this is Geoff. Okay. So what if I think that's just too mundane and I want to make it a little bit interesting? I will change this to Geoff is great. You know, why not? Okay, now let's go back to our website, if I can find it somewhere here. And what we should see right away is, if I can get, there we go. Let's refresh that, and guess what? Geoff is great. I like that a lot more. But let's say my boss, Tim, comes along and says, Geoff, you know, that's a bit arrogant. I don't like that. And what if I can't remember how to get into that pod? Well, I better have a backup, which I do, so I can restore that and not get fired. So here's my Kasten right here. And what I like about Kasten is it's at a glance. Now, I talked earlier about how Kubernetes is so difficult, how complicated to some extent. Well, what you don't want then is a backup application, which is complicated. You've got enough to learn as it is. So what I like about this, I've actually shown this to salespeople, and they've been able to figure things out. And I don't want to get, mean towards salespeople, but generally, if I show them the Kubernetes command line and say, okay, do a backup of etcd, that's it, they're gone to lunch. They actually figured this out and they liked it. So that was good. And it's good too, because if you're a service provider out there or you're providing any kind of service, you want your customers to be comfortable, and your customers maybe don't have time to learn something inside out. So that's an important factor. Anyway, so here I can go to unmanaged applications, and they're all there. And this is namespaces, okay? So I can look for my namespace, Nginx. That's next page. There's a lot of them here. And well, I must have missed it. It's in there somewhere. Oh, you know why it's not there? Because I've already created the backup. Sorry. So that's the beautiful thing. If you create a new application and you've forgotten to create a backup, it'll be there. But if you've already been a good backup person that I am, it'll be in the compliance area right here. There it is, Nginx. Okay, so if we open this up, well, first of all, why don't we restore so I don't get fired? So here's our restores. And very simple, very explanatory. So I did a backup yesterday on Monday, and the backup is comprised of two components, which is very important here. And here's another difference. Remember, this application, and it's cast in this case, it could be something else, is running on that cluster. and it's taking a snapshot of the data on that cluster. Well, what does that mean? If that cluster dies or the hardware dies, you've lost everything. So that's the first step for quick restores. But you must also export to something else. And Kasten can do this to NFS, to S3, or in this case, because it's vSphere, I can actually send the persistent storage to Veeam, which we're going to see in a second. Anyways, first of all, I will restore. So I will press local. I could have done exported, just so it's faster. Again, if you really like the command line, you want those programming types, you can actually copy this command and script it all you want. I'm pressed for time, and I'd prefer just to press the easy button. So restore.
Your RTO is 5 minutes, Geoff. Let's go, buddy.
Yeah, that's it. I'm rushing. So I'm pressing restore. There we go. Going back to dashboard, and this will actually show us doing the restore. Okay, we'll let that go. It'll do its thing. And while it's doing that, I just want to go back and show something in the other window. That should be very quick because it's local. But what I want to do is show you the component that went to Veeam. So I showed you the conventional or the legacy Windows. It's actually an AD server I backed up here. But look at this. Nginx and a nice little Kubernetes sign. That is that Nginx backup, which has been exported. Now, when I talked about having everything in one pane, what do I mean? Remember I did this right click, I have all these options. Well, this is now becoming available as well in the Kubernetes world. I can right click this. Wow. Instant disk discovery, export, restore guest files. Well, why don't we try that? We'll have two restores going on simultaneously. One's happening on my cluster. One's happening on a Windows server, by the way, with Veeam. And we can see which one's faster. This one will take a bit longer probably because the other one should be really quick. Oh, well, there we go. So I want yesterday, Monday, right? And this is just a standard. It's a standard. You see a little penguin there because it's using kind of Linux technology to do this. But what you will see, which will be interesting, it's going to bring up a little window. That could take a few seconds, but it'll show the disk in the container, not a Linux. Well, it is Linux. Of course, containers are based on Linux for the most part, or mostly, but it'll show that one mount. So that is different from a normal Linux restore. Okay, so let's go back now, and I want to see what's happening here. Oh, look, my restore was successful. Also, it's green too, which is always nice because, green's comforting. Red's what scares you. You can see a lot of reds when I was testing this because I was having a lot of fun. Okay, so it claims it's restored it. Okay, remember what I had said before? I said Geoff is great, right? Okay, well, I got in trouble for that. So let's refresh, and guess what? Hi, this is Geoff. So our restore was quick. It worked. Obviously, in a real production environment, things might take longer. You could have databases, whatnot, but it's a very simple and, at a glance demonstration. Going back now to this, let's take a few minutes because it's bringing up a helper appliance. I just want to show this part as well.
Yeah. So Geoff, while that's running, right? If I just jump in here real quick, I mean, I guess this is another one of those key defining moments, right? Where it's really nice to see that the technology has moved along with the application requirements, right? And the advancement of the way that application developers now can confidently build in this cloud native space. And from a customer business operational perspective, can I protect these workloads? The answer is yes, right? Can I protect them in an easy to consume manner with a nice, pretty interface? We obviously saw an example of that. Has the backup and data protection software transitioned to the point where it now has the ability from that single pane of glass to be able to show you, what am I doing with my legacy backups? What's the status and how do I manage my kind of existing virtual machines? And do also I have this at a glance opportunity to interact with and manage backup policies that are associated with cloud native workloads? I can think back to the early days of virtualization. The integration hadn't happened yet. You had to use your traditional legacy backup application for the agents. You had to look at a net new solution potentially for the virtual machine scenario. And when we first started this cloud native journey years ago, there was really only snapshots. I could snapshot, but I didn't understand what were all those pieces, parts, and components of a Kubernetes cluster. I didn't understand a namespace. I didn't understand a pod. I didn't understand secrets. There was all these pieces and parts that were missing. that were important as well, right? The persistent volume claim information, just as another example. So in this, in this journey that we're walking, I think what we really want to get around is that the confidence level should be pretty good right now for the cloud native application developers that want to be able to help this digital transformation journey, right? We're evolving, we're transforming, and we have data protection that can move right alongside with you to give you that confidence, the ability to recover, the ability to restore, the ability to transform. Maybe you deploy in AWS today, and you didn't know a year ago that AWS was going to be your hyperscale public cloud of choice. And inevitably something happens. You have an outage, you have an uncomfortable situation. There's a business decision that gets made that maybe now you want to move a certain portion of workload over to another entity, right? Another hyperscale public cloud, or maybe you want to bring that back on premises because you've decided to run your own self-managed Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah.
Solutions like this give you that cloud portability and freedom of choice, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And as you've been talking, this has come up and proven exactly what you just said. So you saw before what I was doing in the Kasten window. So this is a Veeam Windows server. So it's mounted that. And as anyone who knows Linux will say, well, wait a minute. Okay, SDA I know from Linux, but where's everything else? Where's, the root file system? Well, there isn't. This is just the persistent storage. So there's my index file. And this will allow me to restore this to the local Veeam server, which I'll do very quickly. And, I had one there already. I tested this. I always test very quickly. Last thing, I just want to prove that if I now go to the C index, which is, there it is, C source. What do I have? I have that's the backup before yesterday where I was really going nuts. Hi, this is Geoff. Geoff is the best and deserves a big raise. Sorry, I'll leave that for the last part.
Yeah, you've got Michael laughing. I see Michael's come back on the stream now. We must be running out of time.
There you go. So, he needs a raise there, Tim.
Yeah, for sure.
But I put that in last just in case. I know.
Awesome stuff. I think that's just given me some ideas as well about the persistent volume, bringing that back into Veeam, back on replication, the whole single interface to look after everything. I think there's a hugely powerful message there on there, and thanks very much for the session, guys. I thought it was really useful. There's no questions on there, but hopefully we'll get some comments afterwards as well. But yeah, awesome session. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Michael, thank you very much. Guys, enjoy the rest of your day. Yep. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.